there's been a lot of focus on police violence recently, with police killing people and so forth. And my theory is that, you know, police violence has not increased at all recently. I feel it's been exactly the same for the last 30 or 40 years. The only difference is that now you have social media, and now the people are deciding what it is they want to view, and everyone is now potentially a video reporter with their, you know, everyone has a camera phone with a video camera built in. So now these things are being actually captured and pushed, but I don't feel that this at all means that they're increasing or they're now any different. People are just seeing it more.
That's one view. I would say that the only thing I would disagree with about that is that I think now more than ever, police are more militarized in this country than they've ever been. They have surplus equipment that they bought from the Pentagon. In some cases, the Pentagon's trying to get that back. Before, there used to be a guy in a blue shirt and black pants with a billy club and a revolver. Now you got a guy in full tactical uniform who looks like a Navy SEAL who's pointing an automatic weapon at you. You know what I mean? You have things that are completely unnecessary. That is something that is technically unconstitutional. I mean, we're talking about something called posse comitatus that separates us from other parts of the world when we say that a military entity can never be the entity that polices people. You know what I mean? The military is supposed to go to war with other countries and protect the nation from invasion. It's not supposed to, you know, rifle butt some 16-year-old who is angry because a friend of his was murdered by the police over something totally inconsequential. One thing I will say that's interesting about what you brought up is that people think that you make a good point in the sense that some people think that cops are just fucked up to black and brown people now. Like, dude, imagine the 1970s and the 1980s, how many people went to jail for completely trumped up charges. Think about how many people got killed over the years. I mean, I remember when we were talking about a woman's prison yesterday with a friend, and they were telling me that there were people who had discovered all of these fetuses underneath the women's prison. And they are basically these women that had been raped by COs who had been forced to have an abortion and throw the baby away. This is the reality. Do you remember how they described Iraq under Saddam? Like it was some horrible rape room, maniac shit. His two sons could drive around and pull anyone to a car and kill them or whatever. At the same time, that's obviously probably, even though they were terrible people, obviously, because I've met a lot of people who lived in that time under that regime. But now what's there? An even more terrible regime. And if you want to put ISIS into perspective, imagine what happened when so-called settlers or colonists came to this land and said, hey, I'm just going to take something that's not yours. I mean, if we leave ISIS alone, does that mean they're going to become another America? That's absurd, you know?
If we leave ISIS alone, will they become another America?
But let me ask you this.
That is so crazy when you say it like that.
Let me ask you something, Vlad. You know, I had an argument with I say this all the time. I had an argument with a YouTube scholar, right? And this dude goes off talking about, oh, we need to destroy ISIS, the worst thing in the world. And I said, yes, ISIS is terrible. But I asked him, tell me what you think is the most dangerous thing about ISIS that makes it the #1 problem that the U.S. needs to handle. And this person had the audacity to tell me that they were stealing people's land, right? They were forcing people to convert to their religion, and they were enslaving people, and that was un-American. And I was like, are you out of your fucking mind?
Nothing more American than that.
This is how you, I think some people are just so delusional, they forgot how they got this country, and they interpret that historical analysis that exposes that reality of colonization being too nice a word for genocide and rape. And they take that personally as opposed to contextualizing it with history. They think to themselves, automatically, because I'm a person of European origin, I have to deny that this ever happened to save the validity of what I have set up for myself here in America. And that's not the case. But what a person does need to do is recognize what happened to indigenous and African people here, and to also acknowledge that for many and many years after the creation of America, other European immigrants were treated like absolute garbage. And the premise of this whole idea of a melting pot had nothing to do with black or brown people. It had to do with melting down all the races of Europe into one white race. But the people that applied for citizenship at that time also applied for whiteness. It wasn't like it was just something that went without the other. And unless you were white back in the days in the 1800s, you couldn't you couldn't go to the bank to get a loan.
White
right?
male, actually.
Right.
You could females weren't allowed a lot of these rights.
You couldn't get a loan. You couldn't join certain unions. You couldn't join the police force. You couldn't join the fire department. Stability. All of these things that now created this intergenerational wealth, kind of the thing we were discussing before. You know, you're creating multi-generational wealth. You're creating a legacy of people that actually go to college and do become professionals and engineers. So that's why I never looked at it as valid when I heard that sort of excuse from people that say, well, why can't you guys pull yourselves up by your bootstraps? We did. Well, actually, you guys, or people in general, had advantages that you don't even understand that you had. Now, I have advantages, you know, I have privileges that I needed to look at and accept. You know what I mean? I have the privilege of, I have a male privilege, right? You know, I've never worried about what happens to me walking home at 4 o'clock in the morning, if I'm gonna get raped or if some prosecutor's gonna try and get me off. Vlad, I have the privilege of citizenship, you know what I mean? My cousin got deported. He got deported back to Peru. Big shout out to Joel, love you, my G. But in reality, when I get arrested, as opposed to a person who's not a citizen, that process is completely different to me. I have someone told me I had a straight privilege, and at first I laughed. I said, what does that mean? And they told me something that kind of hit home for me for a second. They said, you can marry the person that you love in any state in this country. And some people can't say that. And you know what? As much as people think that's trivial, that's wrong. And if we are a free society, then that shouldn't be what it is. And if you're gonna persecute people for their political beliefs, and you know what I mean? And then when it comes time to disrespect people, you hide behind the First Amendment. That's not what it's there for. The First Amendment isn't there to intimidate people. It's to prevent you from having your voice limited and to be able to have the power of free speech to say whatever you want. But that doesn't mean that there aren't consequences for the things that you say.